of all good things to come. And we're live. The blue go live button has never been faster. Congratulations to YouTube for outdoing your Tubi selves. It is Tuesday, December 15th, 2020, 5:02 p.m. We're 2 minutes late, but for reasons having nothing to do with the speed of the blue go live button, which was exemplary, before we get started, I do have a Room Raider background upgrade report for you. I have installed lights underneath the baby cannons.
Oh, they're good, Ben.
I'm proud of them.
Better.
I have installed an almost invisible glass dish to catch the dripping pineapple juice.
I see it though.
Yeah, but my head is normally in the way of it, so you won't really see it.
If I pay you money, will you drink the juice at the end of the show?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't even have to pay me money. All right, I have a confession. Importantly, the bottom of the pineapple is beginning to rot. We're not there yet. We're not at a danger point yet, but it is a little soft. So if in the next few days you see that pineapple having been cut off with the battle axe, that is a reflection of why. And finally, over here, I have put in an oil lamp, which is cheerfully burning oil. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to outdo ourselves with strange tchotchkes on the wall. By the way, MSNBC canceled my hit today, so I didn't get to display any of this on national television.
You're not going to do that on national
I am
television.
so totally going to do it. But when I do it, I'm going to go like this, so it looks like the battle axe is buried in my skull. So, in lieu of a complete skull, we have...
I'm sure there's no causality between your backdrop and them canceling your hit, but don't go down that path.
So I think Katie Tur really wants me to do a hit in my hammock, because she saw my tweet about it, and she's like, you wouldn't do that on television. I said, I'll do it on your show. So I don't think she is squeamish about this sort of thing. The battle axe and the skull, we're going to find out. But in the meantime, John LeCarre has died, no doubt because he saw my background, and it finished him off. And so we thought it was important to discuss counterintelligence in literature, and much to the shock of John Cipher, who says having an FBI person on to do this is really fucked up.
Like, that also occurred to me, and then I was like, wait a second, Pete's not CIA.
So wait, let's start there.
Let's start there, indeed.
Because, you know, there was some joshing. But if we start with George Smiley in Tinker Tailor or Call for the Dead, right? The early Smiley books are all about CI. The first one is a CI situation. Who is that in the United States? Is that the Bureau, or is that any of the foreign intelligence agencies?
Well, I think so. So every, I mean, particularly for the FBI and CIA, both do a lot of counterintelligence. I mean, within the U.S., the FBI is the lead agency for conducting counterintelligence activity, but the agency, without getting into a lot of detail, does pay a lot of attention to counterintelligence. Both, some of that is supporting the Bureau's domestic mission, but a lot of that is just kind of their straightforward day-to-day operations and all the things you would. You know, one of the things that makes LeCarre compelling is the way he talks about some of the, you know, particularly the issues when it comes to running human sources and trying to establish their bona fides, what they are or are not, and all that goes to counterintelligence. So that's kind of part and parcel of the intelligence business for the CIA as well as the FBI, and really anybody who's doing human intelligence, you know, expand that to others in the community who are going to do CI. But I would back it up, Ben. I would back it up from that. And first to John, who's a new Twitter friend, I absolutely harbor no ill will
He was
for
joking.
a number of.
He's
Of
awesome.
I know he was. Any number of CIA brethren who deep down inside hide a secret desire to have worked counterintelligence as an FBI agent. I don't hold that against them ever, because it's a fantastic job. But when it comes to LeCarre, so he started in military intelligence, where he was first trained. He went there working in some capacity for British Security Service, or MI5, before he became an MI5 officer. And so he spent, I mean, it's hazy I don't know that I believe everything I read on Wikipedia or elsewhere, but he spent a good 2 to 4 to 5 years in MI5 before he transitioned and became an officer for MI6. So I know, what do they say? Success has 1,000 fathers, but failure is an orphan or a bastard. I know there's a desire to jump on the Carré as some, MI6 foreign intelligence guy. But the reality is, he started out in military intelligence, cut his teeth on with MI5 before he transitioned into 6. So really, and perhaps that's part of the reason why he brings so much to his writing. But it would not
just for those who don't know, MI5.
I was just about to ask you to explain that. Yeah,
MI5 is the domestic intelligence. MI6 is oversees foreign intelligence in the British system, and unlike the FBI, neither of them have law enforcement powers. You guys at the end of the day can kick in doors and arrest the Robert Hansons of the world. There's not that much liaison with law enforcement in the Le Carré novels, usually through this character Mendel, but there's not that much of it at all. And it's always, it's a real arm's length relationship.
Right. And that's true. I mean, I think it helps. There was a lot of debate post 9/11 about whether or not, the FBI was up to the task of doing, domestic national security work. And a lot of that was a skewed conversation, because counterintelligence, has always been a huge portion of the FBI's work going back decades, before World War II, and just wasn't talked about a lot. And so when the failures of 9/11 came up, people assumed, well, look, the Bureau doesn't do intel type work, which wasn't an accurate assumption. Just, I think, in part because A, there had been failures clearly leading up to 9/11, but B, a lot of the work that the FBI did simply wasn't talked about, or wasn't talked about a lot. And so, there are people who looked to the Brits, to the UK, and said, oh, hey, we need to come up with sort of a US analog to that, and split out the FBI to do strictly law enforcement work and create a domestic intelligence agency, which I think to huge relief that didn't happen, because I think that would have been a big mistake for any number of reasons, but that's a conversation for another time. But yes, so when you go to the UK and when you look at these books, they are very focused on primarily MI6. There is some interaction with 5, and you see that natural tension that I think exists anywhere between foreign and domestic intelligence agencies of any nation, but you don't get, in the UK, it's primarily Scotland Yard with a group called Special Branch, which I don't know, that's always been called Special Branch, but when it comes to you've got a spy or a terrorist or somebody who is, has been the focus of intelligence work or counterintelligence work, and the time comes to bring judicial proceedings against them, they're the group that actually, is authorized to conduct arrests and carry weapons and do that sort of stuff that the FBI also does here in the U.S.
Is there kind of a corollary to anything Fourth Amendment related that would prevent a domestic that would prevent domestic surveillance in the UK?
I don't want to answer that question. I don't know what.
I don't know either.
I mean, there are a lot of things there, and what I'm not clear on is what I can and can't say. So I'm sure I'm being overly cautious. But Ben, please.
Yeah,
please.
The UK has some search and seizure restrictions. They are much lower than the United States is, as a general matter.
Okay.
They have tightened over the last several years. They're significantly more than they used to be, but it is they were sort of famously without judicial warrants for very long periods of time. These were things that the Home Office just did on its own. So it's a very different regime, and it has it has stiffened significantly over the last several years, but they don't have a Fourth Amendment jurisprudence.
That was basically like the idea that they don't have something constitutionally protected in the same way that we do. They have it like more through common law, but it's just not as strong. So okay, that makes
I mean, because their court system in general, they have a Supreme Court now, and so the system has strengthened in certain ways, and because of, importantly, I think, because of the GDPR, there are privacy protections under European law that don't exist for U.S. U.S. people. They just don't tend to involve person to government relations. They tend rather to involve the handling of data by corporations, and so there's a very different focus of privacy law. So I want to ask you, as you've read Le Carré over the years and other literature, what are the pieces that you've read that really ring true in counterintelligence, that you're like, this author really understands CI and what it is, and who are the people who really don't?
Well, I think Le Carré, first and foremost, is excellent. I think, stepping back a little bit, I mean, a huge amount of any sort of intelligence and counterintelligence work tends to be very complex, and it doesn't lend itself for dramatic retelling. Certainly not on a TV or movie screen, and even books can be challenging. So people, either through lack of knowledge or in trying to keep up the pace or summarize something, tend to take something which in reality is extraordinarily complex and complicated and labor intensive, and there's a lot of people and moving pieces, and simplify it down to a single event. And so when you look at somebody like Le Carré, and they're writing about what goes into source handling and how you assess a source's information, and at the end of the day, intelligence and counterintelligence, you're trying to do something that's hidden. And on the other side, from a CI side, you're trying to understand what is being hidden, but you're also trying to hide the fact you're doing it. So there are all these layers of deception which cause, in practice, things to become both certainly complex, but also in some ways counterintuitive. And so when you just see it slapdash, a lot of stuff on, certainly on the movie screens, others tend to be much more action oriented, and that's exciting and it's fun and it's thrilling. But when you look at what actually happens and the layers of planning, and for any single event, the 7-8 things that have to occur before that, involving 15 people to create an event that looks innocuous, that looks innocent, is true. I mean, that's the way it works. And so when you read it in Le Carré, and we were talking before we went live about spy who came in from the colon. Well, if you think about, just to get, and spoiler alert, but I'll try not to go too far. But if you get to the point where you're saying, okay, we want you to go and essentially de facto go over to the East, but to do that, we need you to link up with somebody that makes it appear that you are legitimate and have real bona fides. So to do that, you're going to have to meet somebody who's going to recruit you. So to do that, you're going to have to be, drunk and in prison for beating up a grocer. And to do that, you're going to have to explain that you were, fired from your job at the library. And to do that, you're going to have to explain that you were sacked from the service, and all the things that go into making that path look legitimate to the other side take a lot of planning, and a person can't do that. You need all these different people to kind of plug into that. So when you see somebody writing about that and talking about the complexity, that rings true. And so, on the other hand, when watching some show where somebody sneaks into a car, they slap up a camera and a microphone and they're off to the races and they're following somebody around town. It's not that simple. And it's immediately apparent that it makes for interesting television, but there's no way in real life something that quick and that easy could be there. And that's just kind of the tradecraft aspect of it. The other things just kind of, I think much more go to the mental aspects of the work, how to think about issues if you're trying to understand, for Le Carré, for me, it's very much, kind of a twofold one, the idea of how he writes and thinks about how sources are handled and how their information is assessed and how you vet that out. And then the other thing simply is that, his descriptions of particularly finding a mole when you have a problem, when there's an issue where you're trying to find somebody within the inside, how you go about determining what it is, how all the leads you follow, how you test theories against one another, how you look for information you would expect to see that maybe you don't, where you find sources that can rebut or sustain that. That sort of mental process is complex, and LeCarre does a really, really good job, in my opinion, of portraying that. And I think that I don't want to speak for, I wasn't a CIA officer, but I think that probably
that we know of. Sorry.
Yeah.
Damn it.
You've
And
created
now, not anymore, Kate.
You've created a really good legend for yourself. The former FBI counterintelligence official.
Sacked, out of work, drunk, and now I just need, control.
And embittered, man.
I need to go.
Yeah, now you just need the East Germans to come and recruit you.
Any day now, Ben. Any day. I'm waiting for the meeting in the park. It's coming.
Oh, man. But, okay, so Noah Feldman had a great article today in his column in Bloomberg about LeCarre, and it was essentially, and he was going to come on maybe later, so I don't know if he's going to show up, but he's a huge fan of George Smiley, and I was just kind of thinking, I liked what he said, which was really correct, and it especially felt very, very correct after watching The Spy Who Came In From the Cold last night, which was that, for the love of God, if you're used to watching Homeland or any of the Bourne movies or anything around even something much more mundane, I'm thinking Das Liebe der Anderen, the Lives of Others or something like that, the pace of that movie is very, very slow, and I would say that I would have a hard time if I had to watch it now, I would say I would have a hard time even discerning it as a spy movie. It almost it's almost not even clear what he's doing in 90. If you didn't know the background and everything, you wouldn't really know all of kind of the everything that's going into it and the counterintelligence and everything else, which is part of the conceit of the movie, of course, but also Noah's point, and I think it was a really great one, which was just kind of he wrote about LeCarre effectively wrote about much more than tradecraft and much more than spies, and I think that and Ben, that was something that had resonated with you in particular. What about that kind of hits you? I mean, watching the movie last night, it just felt profoundly kind of sad and poignant. It was a story about two people living their lives, and they were being moved like chess pieces, or they had assumed roles as chess pieces, but they met and fell in love or cared about each other, but were still chess pieces. And I don't know. That's a very kind of interesting.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's part, anytime you can get a narrative theme where you're talking about somebody where you can incorporate, and that's inevitably when you talk about spy thrillers, almost always the most compelling things, there's a mole or there's some betrayal or there's some deception that gets brought in. And I think anytime you can get some storyline which allows you to incorporate deception, belief in someone, perception in something that is betrayed or that isn't what it appears, and you question about, does this person, my source, were they really my source? Are they telling me the truth? Were they working for somebody else? Was I being deceived the whole time? That, those ideas are much more than a story of espionage or intelligence. Those go to kind of, that's the reason you can, go and watch, Succession or, anything where you can bring in those same elements. If there's a storyline that can talk to those sort of those kind of more core, these are studies in the human element. I think it's one of the geniuses about, LeCarre, certainly also Graham Greene, in a lot of ways. It isn't, the spy story, the espionage, the counterintelligence is the vehicle to talk about the human condition underneath. And that's, to your point, Kate, I think that's exactly what's going on. And that's what grabs you. I mean, it's nice that as a professional, much as a doctor might watch some medical show, or a military person might watch some, Zero Dark 30 or terrorism, something on TV. It's nice that you say, oh, this is really realistic, but to the extent it teases out that sort of underlying, kind of core human conflict and questions, that's I think what does a story, what makes it very effective.
So why?
Engaging.
So I'm interested in what the underlying human condition that LeCarre is trying to get to is, at least in the pre-fall of the Soviet Union novels, which are almost all Cold War There's one that's an Israeli-Palestinian story. There's a couple that are. There's one early Smiley novel that's actually about a local murder in a prep school in England. But for the most part, they're Cold War fiction. And I guess my question is, what is the story here beneath the spy stories? I mean, I think of him as the sort of ultimate portrayer of the Cold War in its coldness, rather like he's not going to Nicaragua and showing the hot spots, but he's what is it to you that's the sort of story beneath the story here?
Well, I think it's the British story of the Cold War. I think he is a product of coming of age at or near World War II. You're entering the post-colonial environment where everybody is, you've got all kinds of nations declaring independence. You got the war in Algeria. You have all of Francophone West Africa and everybody entering this post-colonial time. You have a British reckoning with whether or not their power has peaked and whether it's declining, what their role is. You have the Cambridge Five. You have all the just
spoiler. It's definitely declining.
And then right, and so all these this idea of, what is the role of the British Empire? What is the role of British power? What does that look like? Is there an ideological basis for them to sort of lead on the global stage? Certainly, is their economy going to do that? Is the military going to do that? What is the role of the kind of British civil servant who has gone to the better schools, who in the past could go to India or wherever the case may be? And what do they translate that to for a future professional career? And is that going to look the same in the government? And then you have this huge, just wildly, devastatingly bad set of spies who were recruited by the Soviets within the British government and the intelligence service, who did immeasurable damage, who led, they say they blew Le Carré's cover, and that's why he left. I don't, who knows whether or not that's accurate, but certainly I do believe it's accurate that Philbian did give up or cause his true name to be given up as an MI6 officer. So that sort of entire worldview, I think you have to look at his writing from the context of the British perspective of that time, which is different. I think the American perspective was probably much more idealistic. I don't, what I've read or seen of kind of the people who were OSS going into the CIA, who was drawn to that service. Certainly the people, the FBI, I think, was pulling from a different set of society, probably, and educational background. But in general, the American experience, we were on the upswing. We were entering
it's much more swashbuckling
that bipolar
culture.
world where we were one of the two big players. So it was, I think, you can't underestimate the British viewpoint in his writing.
So that's interesting, because I think of it as there's this other subtext in a lot of Le Carré's writing of the re-rise of Germany, which you see, I think, like most pointedly in like A Small Town in Germany, which is, about this new capital, Bonn, and there's this sense of Germany as, and of course Smiley is in none of the books, but it's made clear that he was a Germany operative during the war, and he was, it occasionally references that his German speaking is native, or essentially, or passes as native. There is this sense of the UK being surpassed by a resurgent Germany, which is also, I don't think, anything that a CIA officer is especially concerned about in this period of time. But you do have the sense of Le Carré's characters as kind of eyeing West Germany as this kind of scary resurgent thing that, thank God they don't have any military power because they're kicking our asses in economic competition.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that that's a really good observation. I think that the things like it defined the genre. It defined a genre that was very specific to, as Pete points out, to Britain and to specifically the Cold War. And it was spare writing. I mean, like I'm looking it up, like I'm like leafing through this, and it's just it's it is not like it's obviously it's not like it's very it's you kind of can tell that maybe he worked for intelligence and that he came to writing after it. Like, you know, there it's very kind of matter of fact how it kind of goes through through kind of the story and the plot. But yeah, I think that it's I came to LeCarre later, and I think that it's one of those things when you find it and you kind of realize it's like kind of like loving monster stories and then reading Frankenstein for the first time or something, you know. So
yeah, and what's interesting, and I'm thinking out loud, and you can probably shoot this down in a hurry, but what strikes me is there's almost a film noir element to it, that if you look back to like Dashiell Hammett, and if you think back to all the, you know, Touch of Evil in Chinatown, if you look at the stuff that was coming out of the U.S. during the interwar period and the Great Depression, there's a pessimism that feels similar in some ways to Le Carre's tone and tenor of how he's viewing the world. And of course, we come out of the post-war period, and you know, all of a sudden, sky's the limit. You know, we're going to the moon. It's fantastic. We're in this battle with the Soviets, and you know, defining whether capitalism or communism is going to win. So there's a much more optimistic view. But I don't know. Sometimes when I read it, I was thinking you know, you don't have a, you know, kind of a Maltese Falcon feeling, you know, U.S. counterintelligence body of literature, but there's something that seems similar there. And I think
there's no romance.
It's not well developed.
But I think there's another really important literary influence, which is like Howard's End. You know, the sort of early 20th century...
A People's History of the United States, Howard's End?
No, Howard's End, the novel.
Like Forrester.
Forrester.
Okay, sorry. I totally misheard you. Glad
where
I asked. I was so
you know,
confused.
There's this, you know, sort of portrayal of, you know, class striving and envy, the sort of relationship between the middle kind of clerk class of bureaucrats and the sort of industrial class, you know, on the one hand, and the sort of new rich on the other. And there's this kind of general sense, and Forster is early in this, of sort of England in decline. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's a kind of major spiritual component of, you know, of, as you describe, of this, but this is very, you know, very much in a later 20th century, 60s and 70s era a setting, but it's like it combines sort of it combines some of the Cold War mood with the film noir style, with that anxiety about what happens to England now. I don't know.
I think that, yeah, we can bring in people, but I was also going to riff on that a little. I think that that's exactly right. But I also think that, like, I think because of the shared history and the shared language and the youth of America, we forget one of the things that I think is really, really, really remarkable, and I'd be interested in hearing what Tomas or Petra or Christopher has to say about this, because living in London as an American abroad, is just like the people that I've spoken with that grew up in the UK or Britain have really remarked at how the class structure, especially through pronunciation and accent, is still very, very, very alive in the UK. And I was watching I was watching The Spy Who Came In From the Cold last night, and it was all like the King's English, or the Queen's English. It was all the everyone, like, and that actually, by the way, Pete, I wonder what they did in terms of, like, would people have to affect an accent? Because that is like that's kind of an interesting kind of background. If you slip in and out of an accent or something, that would be like a dead giveaway of kind of like having a better, you know, being at Oxford or Eton or something.
Right, and I think you can train that. I mean, that's something, if you study, you can get around, and not in some sort of, you know, with kind of constructive attention to it, I think you can overcome it. But I was thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Dr. Fiona Hill talking about how she, growing up very much in the UK, came up from and had an accent that was not of that same sort of higher echelon cultured, what was viewed as the educated elite, and the difficulties that placed on her and her recounting of that. And one of the nice things about coming to the U.S. and not having that be as much of a discriminator in terms of career advancement or otherwise limiting that.
I don't think about it very much, and I realize that's because it's kind of a privilege that I have from being in the U.S. But it's hard for me to even think about what someone would have to sound like for something to kick in my head to be like, oh, that person is uneducated. I mean, I really do mean that. There's a wide range of accents that I like, that I just it's just not a thing that I think when I first hear someone talk. That's just not, but that is definitely you can, I don't know. It's just an interesting point. Ben, do you want to go to questions?
Before we go to audience questions, I have a question that I think my father would be upset with me if I didn't ask you. So one of my favorite characters in Tinker Tailor and in Smiley's People, and she shows up as well in The Honorable Schoolboy, is Connie Sachs, who is this Oxford-based woman who knows everything about the Russian target, who has an incredible memory and is dramatically underutilized by the service relative to her talents, and she has a chip on her shoulder the size of the UK, and it seems like she's earned it pretty honestly. But the striking thing about her, and the thing that causes the author to adore her so much, as he evidently does, is the precision of her memory and what she does with it. And so my question is, does the FBI have a Connie Sachs, just like the person who knows everything, and when you have to, reacquaint yourself with shit that happened in the Kim Philby investigation from 15 years ago, you trek out to Oxford and you bring her a bottle of something very stiff, and you tolerate her whining a lot about all kinds of things because she knows exactly what the story is behind what's his name, Alexei Polyakov.
So I think anytime you get to the extremes of talent like that, or skill, where you have photographic memory or extraordinary competence, it tends to be accompanied by idiosyncrasies. And I think that you probably find that everywhere. Certainly it's true in the Bureau. And the interesting thing with CI work is it is so long that there are things that come up that require going back 10, 20 years, because suddenly something that did not appear relevant is relevant, and it's old. And so you've got to go back and think and say, okay, who worked on this? Who knows about this? Who can I ask? And that inevitably, maybe they're still in the government, maybe they've left. And then you've got to go back and figure out, okay, how do I ask this without, the minute you show up on some retiree's doorstep and want to start asking questions about a particular individual, they're smarter than you are, but they're going to know exactly what's going on. But short answer, sure. Yeah, they're characters, and I think typically the brighter and more competent the person, frequently the more colorful they can be. So I think that's fair.
All right. Elizabeth DeRico. Is that how you pronounce your name?
DeRico.
DeRico?
So my question is about DeRico. My question is about mental health. I mean, how do you monitor the mental health of people who are working in places where they don't know what's true and what isn't, and what kind of toll that takes?
What a great question. I've wondered that all the time.
That's a fantastic question. I think it's something that everybody in the government has become much more attuned to and looking at from, a mental health perspective of the employee, and certainly in high stress, DoD is doing a fantastic, and this isn't your question, I know, but certainly, kind of understanding that mental health plays a critical role in the employee. And, I assume you're asking not only the employee. There are two aspects to that when I think about it. One is the employee. So somebody who is undercover, and that could be a CIA officer who is overseas, stationed somewhere. That could be an FBI agent who is working undercover in, an organized crime family or a drug organization or a terrorist organization or whatever the case may be. And so there's the U.S. government employee that you do watch and keep track of and make sure from time to time that, I don't want to get into the details about it, but to check and make sure that there is a healthiness that is being maintained the longer you do it. And then on the other side, there's certainly on what I'd say the agent side. And when I say the agent, the source side, people who you've recruited, people who are working for you in a clandestine relationship. There are tensions that come along with that because they're placing a lot of trust in you. They are doing something that is hidden. They're doing something that's unnatural. They're doing something that they can't disclose to people, and that places, you're not trained from the time you're a child that, you're right and wrong, and your ethos is going to include working in a clandestine manner for your government. So people don't have a frame of reference that when you are asked to do that, or when the government asks people to do that, it places certain stressors that any good handler, whether that's a CIA officer, and I defer, if John or anybody else is listening, how they handle it, but certainly something you watch with your agents, with your sources, is how they're.
How do you check in with handlers?
It depends.
Does it depend?
I mean, I think it depends on it depends, somebody, if you're, it depends on any number of things, where you are, the nature of information you're providing. I mean, if it's something where somebody is in a denied territory, something that, is a tough place to work, that has a strong counterintelligence environment, somebody, I think Tehran or Moscow or Beijing, places like that, it's very different if you have, a source where you're running them in a Western European capital because they work at a hotel and you can get all kinds of information from them that you may see on a much more regular basis, but isn't the same sort of fraught relationship. So I think that all really depends. But the more stress, the more concern, right? And that certainly does. That certainly is it's a great question. It's a real consideration, and that comes with a moral obligation. I think certainly for the U.S., I can't speak for other nations, but it's more than just you want your source to be happy and healthy and a good reporter, but you're taking on an obligation when you're handling them for their safety and welfare, and that includes their mental welfare as well.
Do either of you know if there's like a set protocol for like if someone becomes paranoid or like kind of develops paranoia or something like that around what they're doing? Or
I mean, I don't want to get into things. I think it's fair. I'll say this. I think it's fair to say that there are anticipated potential things that might occur, either because it's happened in the past and either through hard experience you understand, or just the human nature that you understand might happen, and that there are things in place to try and address that and manage that. But I don't want to get into a lot of detail about. I mean, I can't speak to. Well, that's all I'll say, I guess.
Yeah.
The Reverend Dr. Hillary Livingston.
Good evening.
That is a badass title, and you.
It is a badass title,
and you fit it all in the thing. I'm like,
yeah. I'm a badass woman, so
nice.
Badass title.
You was also very festive. I am. Loving it.
There we go. I'm very, very into the holidays. So thank you for taking my question. Pete, thanks for sharing with us. I wanted to know if you could tell us what is your favorite fictional spy character and why?
Ooh, good question. Ben, do you have one?
That is a good question. I mean, I guess there's a difference between, I always, like the kind of omnipotence of Carla. That isn't an admirable thing in terms of that I would want to be Carla, but I like the idea
have a beer with him.
Of somebody who was so committed to their cause, and so
Carla from Cheers.
So Carla, but I always, the thing with Carla is like, even like, Smiley, there's, one scene where things have kind of gone to crap and they let Smiley go to India, I think, and try and recruit Carla, and the Indians have detained him and they get into a back and forth, and Smiley's essentially trying to pitch him that everything's gone to hell and now's your chance to hop over and we'll take care of you and your family and everything else. And realizes in the course of that, he lets him use his cigarette lighter, which Anne, his wife, has given to Smiley, and Carla keeps it, and then they part. It doesn't take him up on the offer, and Smiley realizes afterwards that the one thing, that his one weakness is the one chink in his armor, that this unrequited love for Anne, he's given up to Carla, and that he fast forwards. I don't want to give anything up, but anyway. So I admired that idea of somebody who was, everybody thinks about Smiley is brilliant, but yet here's the one person who played Smiley. Again, he takes his lighter. And don't give away, Ben, what happened. Ben and I did my first long form talk with Ben, and Ben gave up a critical element of the Carla trilogy. But I
will not give up anything in the way of spoilers about what happens to that later. Christopher Argyris, the floor is yours.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. Ben, can I ask my question and then maybe slip in something and ask him about whether he has any perspective on the software hack story from the week? Sure. Okay, great. So, Pete, throughout the Mueller probe, there was an expectation of a concurrent counterintelligence investigation. Senate Intel report goes further than Mueller report to implicate Trump campaign and Russian intelligence cooperation. To the extent that classified matters can be publicly known, do you expect key findings from the past or future CIA investigations of Trump and his campaign cooperation, witting or unwitting, with Russians and foreign intel? Do you expect that will be publicly revealed anytime? And then I wanted to ask whether you have any perspective on whether it's sort of a classic Russian operation to, while the whole issue about secure elections is going on, to slip in this attack on this software hack, and sort of while everyone's concerned about secure elections, to attack another place where people aren't looking so heavily.
Yeah. So both great questions. I don't know that my concern is to do a proper counterintelligence investigation of the type that the Senate Intel Committee did, that same sort of scope, with the tools available to the executive branch and the intelligence community, would be a massive undertaking. I think it is critical. I think in some ways to the 2016 campaign and election were one of the biggest either intelligence failures on the part of the U.S. or intelligence victory on the part of the Russians. I'm not going. I don't think Trump was a Manchurian candidate, but I think what they were able to achieve and the things that they did are staggeringly bad from a U.S. perspective, and I think would argue that we need to be doing should have done and should be doing a very comprehensive look at that. I worry, because of the size of that, whether or not that happened, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is, for something that large, I would have expected to have seen some indication of it. Having said that, maybe it is, maybe it will be in the future. And if it's done properly, I don't think much would be public. I mean, I think if there's something where there's a finding that, there are recommendations 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 that we need to shore ourselves up by new laws or new regulations, that something might be made public to support that ask to Congress. And of course, in 50 years or more, that eventually all will get declassified and we'll know. But if it had happened, whatever has happened and whatever might be happening now or in the future, I would not expect from a counterintelligence perspective to hear much about it if it's done well and properly. To the second question about the hack, I can't. It strikes me, we're still finding out, at least I don't know anything on the inside, I'm just know what I've read in the media. It strikes me as a very different sort of activity than a lot of what we've seen, and that it was very professional and that it was very quiet, in that it went on for quite a long time before it was discovered. So it was not something that, kind of a knuckle dragging, take a brick and throw it through the window where you're going to know you've been broken into. It was something that was done with a much greater level of sophistication, which clearly the Russians can do, but it isn't analogous to a lot of what we've seen. And so the question is, how is it discovered now? Was it deliberately publicized by anybody right now? Or is it just when it was found out, it came out? And my gut tells me it's that, because it was so grave. But it doesn't surprise me at all that the Russians were, actively, again, if it is the Russians, actively trying to find and exploit these vulnerabilities.
Laura, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi. Hello.
Also a
Trying
nice
to give
Christmas
you-
tree.
Trying to give you a nice background. So,
Justin,
I was-
it's lovely.
I was just, now I'm embarrassed.
No.
Wondering if you consider any current writers to be in the same league as John LeCarre or at least similar.
I like Alan First a tremendous amount. He's much more not current day. He writes about sort of the interwar period in Europe. Mission to Paris, Night Soldiers, Dark Star are great short reads, which are very, I love. This is more from just the literature, word crafting aspects of it. Robert Littell, I don't know how he stresses the pronunciation of his last name. Wrote The Company. I read that some time ago, but I thought was very good. But I haven't, and some of it is what I haven't done is, kind of diving into the ongoing literature of it's been busy, and then I was writing, which is its own miserable experience.
What? Have you been doing anything? Writing your own
but
book?
I would, if you're looking for just something that I do, I really like Alan First. Again, that's not going to give you a sort of current intelligence flavored book, but he does a really wonderful job of with an economy of words, writing some compelling stuff. And Ben, Kate, I don't know if you might have
Ben,
other
what do you
thoughts or
like,
ideas.
Ben? I'm very curious to know. Hello. Everyone's
So
got their Christmas trees behind them. Sorry.
I am not actually very well versed in spy fiction as a general matter. I'm the wrong person to ask this question.
Oh, like I would. Okay, so I would also say, would you not put Clancy in like? I mean, it's much like pulpier.
Yeah, it's a totally different
it's not
genre.
Literature, but I know, but like, yeah, okay, it's just a different genre. I think you're right. I would just say that that was like my 4th and 5th grade kind of reading material. It was like I was not reading Le Carré in like 4th or 5th grade.
Janine Balekian.
Hello.
The floor is yours.
Hi.
Janine, who has a vendetta against me now because she thought I was serious when I told her Kate's mystery guest was Taylor Swift.
Okay, look, I didn't think that you were serious because I knew it was Taylor's birthday, and I didn't think she was likely to come here on her birthday, but I'm still annoyed at you. As I am drinking out of my folklore mug right now.
All right.
Well, I will be the last to know if Taylor Swift ever shows up to this show. And Flash, we would be like, hi, how are you? That's a funny name. It's just like a pop star. So
hopefully more in your area of expertise. I just, as a coincidence, started watching Night Manager last week. I've never read or watched John Le Carre before. I started watching it because I like Tom Hiddleston. So can each of you please recommend your favorite John Le Carre book and film or TV adaptation?
Great question.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Pete, or should I?
Sure. So favorite Le Carre is probably, is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, just because I love the mole hunt aspect of it. Adaptation, I'm going to go outside of Le Carre and say what I've just started writing or watching rather. The Bureau, which is a French production, which is really, really good.
Virginia Heffernan was so hot to trot about that.
It is well written. It is so far. I mean, I'm 4 episodes into the first season. Accurate. It's French and it's talking about the DGSC, but it is thoughtful in a what seems to be a very accurate way. So I'd recommend that. And I hear season 2 is far better than season 1, so I'm looking forward to that if true.
So I agree that the greatest of the Le Carre novels is Tinker Tailor. It's the warhorse answer, but sometimes the warhorse is Beethoven's Fifth, and Le Carre's greatest novel is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I do think the best movie. So the most famous Le Carre adaptation are the Alec Guinness mini-series from the mid-70s of Tinker Tailor and Smiley's People. They are both wonderful. I think the most perfect movie adaptation of a Le Carré book is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, with
the one
Richard
I watched last
Burton
night.
and
It was
Claire
very good.
Bloom. It's in
It's free
black
on
and
Prime.
white, and it is just a perfect little movie.
It's short.
It's short. It's super depressing.
Really depressing.
And it is a beautiful portrayal of the gross, seamy side of like the completely non-glamorous side of what it takes to keep an agent in place. And it's very unsentimental. It's beautifully acted, and it's a gorgeously written script. So that's my answer.
I asked Ben yesterday which I should watch, because I haven't watched very many, and that's what he recommended, and that's what I did. And now I'm gonna watch so we can watch the Alex Guinness together, and you can let me know how if you want to, because I'm gonna start watching it now. And
just one note on the Alec Guinness thing. So Alec Guinness became George Smiley in the public mind, but actually, if you read the texts about what Smiley looks like, he looks much more like the guy in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, who plays
schlubby.
him, who's schlubby and a little bit round, and he doesn't have the austere, like, Obi-Wan quality that Alec Guinness brings to the role.
That's actually that's a good reminder, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah, Smiley's a schlub.
And what's interesting about that too is LeCarre gave an interview at some point that he said because he was writing at the same time he was writing about Smiley after Alec Guinness had started playing the character, and he said that in his mind, Alec Guinness had become Smiley, and he had started writing the character as if it was going to be played or was played by Alec Guinness, and he realized, and you'll see, and he said in my writing, I stopped writing about Smiley because I couldn't get Alec Guinness out of my head when I was writing about it, which is
where I have to though make a pitch for The Hunt for Red October as the best movie. It's been a while, Ben. I like calm down.
I'm totally okay with that. And you're saving Pete. You're buying Pete some time from Jim McGuckin's John Durham question. So like the gentle lady shall take such time as she may require, as they say in the house.
Let me tell you about The Hunt for October. I'll just start reciting the whole movie. I can do it. I can literally text my brother any line from the entire movie, and he will text me back the next line. So, anyways. That just, if anyone wants to do that with me for hours in Twitter, it's like better than solitaire. So
all right, Jim, here's your chance. Let's see if you can get Pete to talk about the Durham investigation.
Yeah. First of all, Peter, I'm reading your book. It reads like a little bit of a spy novel. I got to admit, you've got a flair there.
I wonder why.
Okay,
we've got a mole.
He describes the Canadian Americans very well. It's fun to watch. I watch the Americans and love that. But nonetheless, back to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, there's a scene in there where Peter Gillam's hauled in for an inquisition. He's trying to chase the mole with Smiley. You remember that. Peter, we have a little crisis come urgently. Well, that question applies to you. Okay, so this John Durham thing, I guess, has it may continue on. I don't know. And are you going to be hauled in front of an inquisition or something to that effect?
I mean, look, I expect if they want to understand what happened in 2016, I don't know how you do that without talking to those of us who worked in 2016. I'm a little befuddled why, he's now gone on longer than Mueller did, which is, make of that what you will. And so I anticipate that there will be, at some point, a desire to kind of go through and understand it. I'm very concerned, certainly with the statements that have come out with, about to be ex-Attorney General Barr about what he believes to have occurred which are utterly false, in my opinion, are radically politically motivated and undermine any of the best traditions of the Department of Justice, which give me some pause about the legitimacy of what Durham is doing. Having said that, up until this point, Durham has a very strong reputation for, working complex cases and finding the truth. But I, find it troubling to try and square that reputation with so many of the statements that have come out of this Department of Justice. So, I've always been interviewed, talked, testified, whether it was the Inspector General, whether it was Congress, whether it was internal investigations, whatever the case may be. I've always, done that. And so, if and when that time comes, I expect, my hope is if they're pursuing the truth and interested in the truth, it's very noble and very righteous. And hopefully that either arrives at that point or we'll see what happens to the next administration.
But if John Durham hauls you in and addresses you as young Peter Strzok, which is, I believe, how Percy Alleline begins his interrogation of Peter Gwillim, and you do, of course, share a first name, you will cooperate with Mr. Durham?
I mean, look, the truth is the truth. I mean, I am unaware, and I've said this before, I am unaware of anything improper, let alone illegal, that occurred in 2016. I mean, I know, the stuff that came up with Kevin Klein-Smith, I obviously didn't know at the time, and he's paid a terribly high price for that. But, as far as anything else, I just, the things that were done were entirely properly motivated and properly, in terms of regulation and law, properly predicated and done for the right reasons. So, there's nothing there to hide for anybody. Again, I just don't. This isn't particularly complex, and again, it causes me some concern when I see what appears to be, this reporting in I guess Politico broke it that they had gone over to the UK and actually sued to try and get Christopher Steele's notes about some of his interaction. And I'm like, well, why? You're pursuing these crazy tinfoil-hatted sort of theories that really don't. That seem to be rather extreme. And I think if you talk to people who were involved in it, would clearly kind of reveal what they were and what they weren't. And when I see stuff like that happening, it kind of causes me to scratch my head a little bit. But again, the truth is, and you can spin it whatever way you want, but ultimately it does come out, and I'm confident in this case it will.
We're going to leave it there.
What a fun way to spend an hour. This was like a really nice kind of way to kind of reminisce about kind of, I don't know, what these novels and the stories meant. And then like also kind of to put them in context around, I would have to say that like, did you grow up, was this like for both of you, like where did Le Carré like kind of fit into kind of spy fiction for you? Was it the only thing? Was it not really like, how did he come into your world?
Not at all.
My dad introduced me to Le Carré when I was an early teenager.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think I was not. I think we had Little Drummer Girl, perhaps, again through my father, but it was not anything that. I mean, there was none of the Smiley, none of the counterintelligence stuff that came much later.
Yeah, I found it much later, and it's so good. So yeah.
So tomorrow we have Andy Slavitt coming back to talk about the logistics of vaccine distribution.
I'm so excited to see him. He's fun.
I forget who is going to be with us on Thursday. Susan Landau will be with us Thursday to talk about how the going dark problem has been solved by people like Pete figuring out how to break your iPhone. And I forget who we have on Friday, but
we don't have anyone. We had someone, but then they had to cancel. So we're back to, I'm going to find someone for Friday.
All right. So that'll be exactly 23 hours from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore, but we do have a whole pile of John Le Carré novels, a shocking number of which are really good, particularly the ones that predate the fall of the Soviet Union.
Ben, how's that pineapple juice looking?
Oh, you want me to drink the pineapple juice? Hang on.
I just want to. Please don't do it if there's like something growing in it. If it's rotting and gross.
There's not a lot of it. So